the years, this channel has extensively studied people who fall into the category of huge embarrassing failure. We have studied so many embarrassing failures, I could teach a doctorate level program at Woke U, the plight of the huge embarrassing failure. If there's one thing that I have learned about huge embarrassing failures, they never take personal responsibility for their own failure. They always blame someone else. Take Bomani Jones, for example, the originator, the undisputed, undefeated heavyweight champion of failure, the inspiration for the term huge embarrassing failure. I challenge you to give me one example of Bomani Jones taking personal responsibility for his lack of success. Go ahead. I'll wait. It's not the Bobo's fault. He's not to blame for his failure. No. It's mythical racism. It's the evil white man. White people can't relate to the Bobo. No. People can't relate to the Bobo. Remember when Tiffany Cross, better known here on the channel as Tiffer the Bongo Sniffer, remember when she got fired from MSNBC? That was not her fault. It wasn't her fault that her ratings were in the pooper. It wasn't her fault that the controversy she created caused her to become more trouble than she was worth. It was racism. Yeah, well, it must have been reverse racism since the woman that fired the bongo sniffer was a black woman. A couple of weeks ago, Pat McAfee, he began his tenure with ESPN. Now, you guys already know how I feel about this. I think this was a horrible decision by Pat McAfee. Now, it was a great decision for him financially, but creatively speaking, I just don't see how this marriage works out in the long term. I believe Pat McAfee is set up for failure. I don't feel like his style fits with ESPN. And if the ratings for his debut episode are any indication, it looks like I might be right. Pat McAfee's debut episode drew just over 200,000 viewers. Now, 200,000. That is a big number for Skippy Bebe on Undisputed, but ESPN ain't paying Pat McAfee $85 million for ratings comparable to Skip Bayless. Now, even though I think this decision was bad for Pat McAfee, this was a rare instance where ESPN actually made the right call. Normally, the shitfucks making decisions at ESPN are absolutely god-awful, but breaking the bank for Pat McAfee, it proved that ESPN still has the ability to make the right decision. Pat McAfee is entertaining. More importantly, Pat McAfee is relatable. He attracts the exact audience that ESPN desperately wants. Guys like me, the 18 to 49-year-old male who used to watch ESPN regularly when the network was dedicated to sports instead of being dedicated to Wiener. Anytime, though, you reach the pinnacle of success, the feelings of jealousy tend to emerge. There is a former member of the mainstream media who feels that the spot that was given to Pat McAfee should have been given to him. Matter of fact, I'm pleasantly surprised that I haven't seen accusations of white privilege. Pat McAfee was only given his role because he likes melanin. Yeah, turn on First Take and take a shot every time you see the white man. You're going to be sober and passed out due to extreme boredom. According to Dan Le Batard, the role that ESPN gave to Pat McAfee, it should have been given to him. And the reason that it wasn't was because of his woke politics. Before I share this delusional bullshit with you, let's get to the sponsor for today's video, my friends over at 0 Hour Apparel. Now, it can be hard to find clothing companies that aren't donating a portion of their proceeds to Woke United Methodist instead of donating their proceeds to the people that really matter, the people that really need it, the people in our military. Anytime I find an apparel company that's owned by good people like you and me, I try to bring them to your attention. And that is the case with my friends at 0 Hour Apparel. 0 Hour Apparel. They are a family-owned business run by a family of military veterans. They also offer some kick-ass clothing. Check some out for yourself. Now, this one right here, this is one of my personal favorites. You know how I feel about emotional men getting in their feelings. But don't worry, ladies. They also have offerings for you too. My girlfriend, she loves tank tops and anything with a heart. I'll be getting this one for her. The company is named 0 Hour Apparel because 0 hour, that represents the start of a mission in the military. It's the moment our military makes a difference. You can make a difference too in the lives of our military veterans by supporting my friends at 0 Hour Apparel. Use my promo code BTL10, BTL10. Receive a 10% discount on your first order. Click the link in the pinned comment or the description below. Head over to 0hourapparel.com today to place your first order. All right, earlier this morning, Dan Le Batard was questioning why ESPN gave this opportunity to Pat McAfee when they could have given this opportunity to him. I don't understand. Pat McAfee copied my formula. It's the same show, damn it, except he's way more entertaining than I am. I will give Dan Le Batard a little bit of credit here. At least he had the self-awareness to realize that he's not as entertaining as Pat McAfee. Matter of fact, Dan Le Batard is not entertaining, period. But that is where the self-awareness ends because these two shows, they are not close to being the same. The Pat McAfee show is centered around football. He interviews people like Aaron Rodgers. He talks to people like Peyton Manning. Pat McAfee, he talks to people who actually played in the NFL. You know, guys that can give you insight, guys who know what the fuck they're talking about. Now let's compare that to Dan Le Batard. When Dan Le Batard wants to give his dwindling audience some insight on the NFL, you know who he calls? Mina Kimes. Mina Kimes? You might as well call Mila Kunis. Dan Le Batard claims that ESPN didn't give him the same opportunity as Pat McAfee because of his belief in woke politics. They knew I was a dedicated worshiper of the woke oak tree. They knew I would not remain silent in the battle against mythical racism. Are we talking about the same network? Let me get this straight. The network dedicated to Wiener, the network dedicated to diversity, chose the white man over a minority because Dan Le Batard is a deacon at Woke United Methodist? The same Woke United Methodist that executives at ESPN worship in every Sunday? You expect me to believe that? The truth is, it wasn't executives at ESPN that didn't relate to the political leanings of Dan Le Batard. It was ESPN's dwindling audience that didn't relate. By the way, here's some more truth. ESPN actually gave Dan Le Batard a similar opportunity. When Colin Cowherd left ESPN Radio in 2015, it left a gigantic void in their daily lineup. Cowherd was a cash printing machine for ESPN. In my opinion, the prime years of Colin Cowherd from around 06 to 2007 to around 2013 or 2014, that was the best sports talk radio in the history of the business. Now, that's just my opinion, but when Colin Cowherd was in his prime, the dude was absolutely untouchable. He left big shoes to fill. Management at ESPN, they felt like Dan Le Batard was more than capable of replacing Colin Cowherd. In other words, they gave him the opportunity. How did that work out? Huge, embarrassing failure. Within 2 years, Dan Le Batard managed to make millions of people turn off ESPN radio. His ratings were so bad, half of the ESPN radio affiliates in the country dropped his show from their lineup. Local stations in Beaver, Louisiana, they filled the time slot with classic shows like Farmer Frank Inspects Porky's Taint. Affiliates, they thought a show about a farmer inspecting his pig's nether regions was more viable and entertaining than Dan Le Batard. But our failure Danny, he didn't want all of this sympathy for himself. He also shared the sympathy with some of his colleagues in the category of huge embarrassing failure. He was not the only one at ESPN that was passed up for opportunities like the ones given to Pat McAfee. According to Danny Le Batard, both Sarah Spain and Bomani Jones, they were also overlooked because of their dedication to worshiping the oak tree. Excuse me? Come again? Did I read that correctly? Did you just say that Bomani Jones was not given opportunities at the worldwide leader in woke? Do I really need to go through the list of opportunities that Bomani Jones was given in the last 10 years by ESPN? I don't need to explain the results because each opportunity ended the same way. Huge, embarrassing failure. ESPN radio, failure. Multiple time slots on ESPN television, failure. HBO, failure. Podcast, failure. Bomani Jones failed at everything. When ESPN fired his ass, he picked up a job dancing at Club Shay Shay. He had one job at Club Shay Shay: entertain lonely men. Once again, the Bobo failed. He couldn't erect one woke boner. And don't even get me started with Sarah Spain. Outside of her immediate family, no one knows that she even exists. You could put together a 2-photo lineup featuring Sarah Spain and a prize jackass. Most people couldn't identify Sarah Spain. Hell, most people would point to the jackass. Since Dan Le Batard is struggling to understand this, since he is struggling to understand why Pat McAfee was given this opportunity over huge embarrassing failures, I'm going to break this down into simple terms for him. And shout out to Bobby Burek at Outkick who compiled this information so I didn't have to. I'm not sure if Danny B realizes this, but ESPN is running a business. Over the last few years, woke shitfucks have completely tanked that business, but let's compare the size of their audiences. Last 3 episodes, Dan Le Batard has a combined audience of 94,000 viewers. That's combined. About 31,000 an episode. Yesterday on YouTube, Pat McAfee, 485,000. Dan Le Batard's most popular show, his most watched show drew 112,000 viewers. This dude ain't in Pat McAfee's league. I hate to break it to Dan Le Batard, you are not on the same level as Pat McAfee. I'm sorry, dude, but you're on my level. And I don't have the famous friends and the multi-million-dollar budget that you have. You spend all that money, you have all that free publicity, and here you are competing with a dumbass like me. I will say this, though, about Dan Le Batard. And don't get me wrong, Dan Le Batard is a proud deacon at Woke United Methodist, but I will say this about him. I'll give him credit for this. Dan Le Batard is extremely loyal. I remember years ago, ESPN cut the budget for his show. They were cutting the salaries for his producers and the unknown sidekicks that he features on the show. Dan Le Batard, though, he refused to let them go. He refused to fire them. He actually paid their salaries out of his own pocket. I will always have a little bit of respect for him for that. Now, with that being said, it is not ESPN's fault that Dan Le Batard was a huge embarrassing failure. They did not overlook him for opportunities because he worships a woke god that doesn't exist. Dan Le Batard was given opportunities. He failed. But give me your thoughts. Dan Le Batard claims that ESPN overlooked him, Bomani Jones, and Sarah Spain because they worship the woke oak tree. Is anyone biting into that shit sandwich? Also, what do you think of Pat McAfee so far on ESPN? I've watched a little bit of his show here and there. I saw some of the simulcast the other night that he was doing during the Texas-Alabama game, which, by the way, that is another reason that ESPN broke the bank for Pat McAfee. He's versatile. Could you imagine Bomani Jones simulcasting a football game? Every time a referee throws a flag on a black player, he only threw that flag because he's inherently racist. Right now, it's so far so good for Pat McAfee with ESPN, but I am waiting for that honeymoon phase to end. I think it's coming. Now, I know Pat McAfee doesn't think it's coming, but I think it's inevitable. What about you? You let me know. Sound off in the comments below. Like, subscribe, share the video. I appreciate you guys and your continued support. I got to get the hell out of here. I've got to go watch the kid. It's her first flag football game tonight, so I'll see you guys tomorrow.